First, before I get into the procedures about how we redistrict New Jersey, just a little bit of background. First of all, the traditional way of doing this redistricting, redrawing all these lines, is to have it done by elected officials, usually by the legislature. And you'd have the legislature redrawing the districts from which they themselves would be elected. You have the city council redrawing the wards from which they would be elected. So that the nasty term gerrymandering pops up very quickly. Gerrymandering is when you manipulate these lines for some partisan political benefit. And it's historically been a major problem all across the country. You may remember a few years ago, the Texas legislature was trying to redraw congressional districts, and it got so bitter down there while they were doing this job that the Democrats in the legislature left the state. And out of state, so the legislature couldn't function because they felt that they were going to be gerrymandered out of office. This sort of thing has happened over and over and over again all across the United States throughout our history. In contrast, a little bit in contrast, New Jersey probably has done more than any other state in trying to eliminate these partisan gerrymanders. In every case, at congressional level, state legislative level, county freeholder, municipal wards, in every case, a process has been put into effect in New Jersey where the redistricting is not done by the elected officials. It's done by some sort of a bipartisan body. A bipartisan body with equal representation from the two major parties, Republican and Democrat, with some mechanism in there for breaking the tie. Because almost inevitably it's going to be a tie. It's going to be a stalemate. Now, once the seats are distributed, then we have to split the state up into districts to elect members of Congress. Let me back up just a second. There's some wild cards in this distribution of seats that may change it. One, undercount adjustment. Over the last two censuses, there's been a lot of talk about adjusting the census for the undercount, people who the census misses. It hasn't been done in any of the censuses yet, but this is something that will be a hot issue in the next year. It will be debated at the national level as to whether the Bureau of the Census should take the figures that they got from the census and expand them for estimates of the undercount. Another wild card, votes for the District of Columbia and Utah. There's legislation in Congress right now to give extra seats to District of Columbia and Utah. Well, then the question is, do those extra seats stay there after the census of 2010, or does the House collapse back to 435 seats? When we admitted new states, Hawaii and Alaska, the House was at 435, gave each of those places a seat until the next census, but then the whole House went back to 435. I don't know what might happen now. Now, once we know how many seats we have, and we are, no doubt that we're growing slower than the rest of the country. It's just a question of how much slower. Once we know how many seats we'll have, then we have to divide the state up into districts. New Jersey's record on doing this is not glowing. There was partisan gerrymandering of congressional districts in New Jersey. It was a big problem in the 1980s. The legislature was still doing it then. The legislature was doing it, and whoever was in control of the legislature could whack up those congressional districts to benefit their party. And they did it in a big-time way in the 1980s. With the result that New Jersey's plan of congressional districts got appealed all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And there's some scathing language in the opinion of the Supreme Court about what New Jersey did in terms of congressional districts. It resulted in our districts being thrown out. I think we learned our lesson to some extent at that time, because then, the next time around, the 1990 census, the legislature provided for the districts to be drawn by a bipartisan commission. They picked up the model from the state portion of the commission, and they applied it to the congressional commission. There will be a bipartisan commission with 6 members appointed by the leaders of each party and a 13th member appointed by the first 12. Not Chief Justice of the Supreme Court does not get into this unless the 2 party delegations can't pick this 13th member. This Congressional Apportionment Commission has a lot more time. They really have until the spring of 2012 to draw the congressional districts. The special aspect of this, though, is that the courts, remember, all the other districts I said, generally you have a 10% leeway where you can play around that. The districts are reasonably equal. They're sufficiently equal if you have them within 10% of each other. Congressional districts, it's different. The courts have held that the state has to make a good faith effort to achieve exact population equality among congressional districts. How does this apportionment, this state congressional district commission perform? Well, after the census of 2000, the average size of congressional district in New Jersey was about 625,000 people. About 625,000 people in the average congressional district. The districts that they drew in 2001, the largest district differed in population from the smallest district by 1 person. A fantastic job of district. How did they do it? They split up municipalities all over the state. Took an election district from this place and added to that district. Took a street from this district and added to another one. They chopped up 28 municipalities with congressional district lines. And you may very well recognize some of them around this part of the state. Bloomingdale up in Passaic County was a little place of about 7,000 population. They ran the line between the 5th district and the 11th district right through all the election districts in Bloomingdale. But they did get things equal, at least on paper. Finally, the election districts. This is the last step in the process. Election districts are the districts that are set up. And again, this is a phrase which is in the law, which is in the course that I teach. I say it over and over again. Election districts exist for the convenience of the voters. If you're in an election district which is inconvenient to you, complain, because the law says that it should be changed to make them convenient for the voters. Election districts are the smallest areas from which that you would use to run an election. And an election district must fit inside of any other district in which you elect anybody. It has to fit inside a congressional district, has to fit inside a state legislative district, a county freeholder district, a ward. So visualize a map, let's say a map of a county or a map of a city, and you have lines like this for congressional districts. You have lines like that for state legislative districts, lines like this for municipal boards. All of those little areas that are defined by those lines have to have at least one election district. So you can wind up with some very tiny election districts, and they have to be done for the convenience of the voters. The rule basically is that they shouldn't have more than 750 registered voters, but they can be smaller, and sometimes they have to be smaller because they all have to fit inside of some other district. That is a rundown on the major redistricting that has to be done.